All right, so we're going to be discussing helping students read technical textbooks. In my case here, it's an anatomy textbook, and I'll be using the technique SQ3R, which I use with my students. So a little bit about me professionally. I am a registered nurse. I am an alumni of Bloomsburg University with my bachelor's in nursing. I'm a registered nurse for 24 years. 6 of those I was an infection prevention coordinator. So while I feel for all healthcare workers in this COVID crisis, I know my infection prevention coordinator um, coworkers are, at the head of that. So they have really big responsibility. Probably, I would say, besides being a teacher and being infection preventionist, was my second favorite thing I've ever done. So I switched to being a instructor in a CTE in 2015. I have my vocational 2. I completed the praxis and the coursework just recently, and am anticipating graduating with my master's degree in career and technical education from Temple this December. So I am in my last capstone course for that. So Professor Yun, if you're participating, I'd just like to say hi, and you're absolutely making me nervous knowing you're here. Okay. Um, Before COVID, I had brown hair. After COVID, I have gray hair. I would like to think that that's because I accepted the 3 inches of gray that grew in, but it may just be a typical, female response to, stressful situations, dye her hair and cut it, right? But I'm loving the decision. So a little bit about me personally, the hardest part about this being virtual, and I think any of us teachers, instructors can speak to this, is that it's so hard to make those personal connections with, in this case, our audience and our students. I am fortunate enough at this time to be in person, 5 days a week in person with my students, and I'm grateful for every day we get to be there. So I would put these pictures up. I would say I describe myself as adventurous. I've hiked to the top of Mount Katahdin and Mount Marcy with my family. We've been whitewater rafting on the Kennebec. This was right before a class 4 or 5 rapid. And the following series of pictures is me almost falling out of the raft, but they were not very good pictures of me, so I left those out. Many of these adventures were with my son's scouting troop. He just recently earned his Eagle Scout, so we're super proud of him. He is a senior this school year and is a career and tech ed student as well in our auto technology program. So I really, are wrapped up in and have a vested interest in career and technical education. I am also a runner, and for all my running friends, I wouldn't want to disappoint you to not mention that I am a runner, because that's what runners do, is talk about being a runner. So I am an instructor at Schuylkill Technology Center. Again, it's a career and technical education school. We have 2 different campuses. They're approximately 10 miles apart. I'm here at the North Campus, and this is our other building. Some unique things about STC: we have 12 sending schools, so the red dots are us, and the blue dots are the 12 sending schools. And we have our students for 90 days, and then we switch and get a whole nother group of students. So we're currently in what we call the A cycle, and in January, we'll switch and get a whole new cohort of students. Besides their program, CTE program, students have social studies. I know that sounds really great, but I know my CTE friends understand that getting 12 sending school districts to agree on sending and leaving times and social studies schedules doesn't always work out really well. So we do have a lot of students in and out of our classrooms at various times of the day. So while I theoretically have them for 5 hours a day, it's never, that smooth of a schedule. But we, like we do in CTE, we figure it out, and we, make these things happen for our students. So just a breakdown of what our student body looks like. We are predominantly, have predominantly white students. Um, about a small percentage are ELL, but I've had ELL students in my classroom. 35% are disabled with IEPs, and about half of our student population is economically disadvantaged. And I can say that having free breakfast and lunch for every student this school year because of COVID really has been a wonderful thing, and a big relief, I think, for staff and students, is that just takes away a big concern for many of our students. We do have a majority of students in the school are male, and most of the females do kind of tend towards the traditionally female careers, healthcare, cosmetology, and education. So let's see out here if I could take a look at our results. Oh, I don't think did I not activate it? Maybe nobody got to take them. Nobody got to take the poll. Okay. Well, we'll let that go. But my questions here were, do you have a textbook for your program? I know not every instructor uses a textbook. Do you use the textbook you have for your program on a regular basis for only some topics or barely? Do you assign reading a chapter or section of the text to your students before they begin the unit? And do you think your students actually read the chapter or section before you assign the unit? So the reason I put these questions here is that, first thing in my learning guide for my students is read chapter X, Y, or Z, whichever chapter we're going to be doing. And learn very quickly, and I remember what it was like to be a high school student, is that my students were not reading that chapter. And so just that basic contact with the information wasn't there. And then as I was moving through my Temple classes, my literacy and differentiation class, I was introduced to the technique SQ3R. So if you're not familiar with this technique, it is a reading strategy and it's been around since 1946. And there are different versions of how to use the strategy. But basically, the first S stands for survey. You skim the text for headings, pictures, charts, bold print terms. Questions, you turn each of the section headings into a question or set of questions. The first R is for read. Read the text with the purpose of answering the questions. Second R is for recite. Write answers to the questions using your own words. Third R is review, practice recalling information from memory. I do have this card, a couple versions of this in your handouts for the presentation, and you'll see that my recite and review are a little bit different. And that's the great thing about these techniques, is you can customize them to what works for you, your students, and your purpose. So moving along, I was in my child and adolescent development course and delved a little bit more into SQ3R and the research behind it. So why does this work? So my background again is nursing and big focus on evidence-based practice. And so it was important for me to understand, what the evidence is about this technique. Is it effective? And so here we have a study that using this technique based on information processing theory of learning helps students process incoming information, in this case print, and deal with it more effectively. And I think that's huge. The students, if they do read the text, are they actually processing it? It forces them to process it in a productive manner. It forces the students to use metacognition to think about what it is that they're reading. And as we go through the process, I really model the forcing them through thinking about what it is that they're reading and what the words are asking or saying. It helps activate prior knowledge. And again, in the modeling, I help to incorporate that as well. And then metacomprehension. So the summary part of this review, allows them to evaluate their learning. Can they answer the questions they developed? Do they need to go back in and put more work in? Another study here, this was with college students. And so they had students take notes and not take notes. And the longest story short is no matter where in the process they took notes, they scored significantly higher in this course than students who did not take notes using the method. Another study, this talked about text-to-speech software and the SQ3R. So the great thing about so many textbooks, and I just switched to a textbook that has this software, is for those that benefit from listening to the words on the page versus reading them, and using this technique also helps them, especially those who struggle with reading and comprehending the information, and it also gave these students improved positive attitudes towards reading, improve vocab, and increase comprehension. So things we want all our students to feel good about. And this I found interesting because this was another college student study, and I find it very interesting that some students don't buy their textbook anymore. And one of the students, as a result of the study, bought the textbook. But more importantly, another student said that she thought she knew how to read effectively, but after struggling with college level material, she tried SQ3R and found that she understood the material better. And this was a big driver for me. So about 10% of my students do go on to post-secondary education and come back and be are members of my occupational advisory committee. And they often speak of the struggle between that leap from high school to college and the expectations. And so I know I needed to do a better job of giving them the tools to be more effective. And at some point, if even my students who go out and work immediately, eventually go back to school at some point, either to be an LPN or any of the RN programs. So just as an aside, this is my college anatomy and physiology textbook. Yes, I still have it. And the funny thing about this is I pulled this out somewhere along the way about learning SQ3R, and these were my examples of my note-taking skills as a college freshman. Lots and lots and lots of highlighting. I don't know that I ever really took notes. My anatomy professor was really great in that she had a kind of pre-formatted set of notes for her lecture. But again, like a lot of my students come back to say, there's so many questions on the test that they didn't talk about in class. And that expectation from the professor, they don't understand that they expect that if they assigned a chapter reading that, they interacted with the text. So again, more reasons why I looked into this method. And lots of colors. That comes up a little bit later. So I do teach high school students. Our students are freshmen through senior. I typically have the juniors and seniors, some sophomores, but and definitely adolescents. So we know that SQ3R taps into their increased processing speed and working memory, right? So that's all, developing at this age. And they have the ability for meta comprehension to understand what they learned. Now, teaching students to understand that they need to delineate what they know and what they don't know has become obvious to me. So my students use flashcards a lot, and I encourage it for a lot of the work. But what I notice is they'll consistently go through one set of flashcards, always the whole set of flashcards. And if I ask them, how they're doing, they'll say they know most of the words. And if I direct them to put aside the ones that they know and focus on the ones that they don't know, they'll increase, going from understanding maybe 80% to, 90 to 100% of the words. So that kind of, helping them weed out that, okay, I do understand this. These are the things that I don't understand. Adolescents have better inhibitory control. So this works well with them so they can stay focused on the information. All of the articles spoke to the importance of secondary and post-secondary students having the ability to and skills to understand difficult texts. And we know that is a real struggle. The textbook that I use in class for anatomy is very technical. If you haven't looked at the materials I sent as we work through it today, you'll see that. And in every class we have in every classroom, the reading skills of my students range all over the place. Teaching them a skill to help them tackle the material is helpful to all of my students. And then, like I mentioned, most of my students will continue on to a post-secondary program to further their education. And so, strategies like SQ3R are going to be helpful to them. Okay, so How did I implement this technique? I developed these cards. So at the beginning was kind of very, straightforward. No bells and whistles here, but the basic information is here. And eventually I developed, a nicer version of this, but I print these out and laminate them. Students can then use them as bookmarks as we move through. So what I'm going to walk through today is the first modeling of this, and then I have students kind of move to guided practice and then take notes independently. So they have this to refer to from this lesson on. And then I adapted a Cornell Notes to work for my use of SQ3R. So kind of the traditional Cornell note setup, but I have over here a spot for vocabulary. Here's where I'm expecting them to take their notes. And I added this drawing and pictures. So I will readily admit that I am not an artist. I teach students wonderfully with stick figures. It's actually an ongoing joke in my class, and I have examples of my drawings. I'm not going to win any awards for being artistic, but it does help students who are visual learners and who benefit even, to just get some kind of picture that helps them understand the information um, on a piece of paper. And then, of course, the other summary part for review of the information is at the bottom. So how do I roll this out with a lesson? So I chose body cavities unit. This is typically something we've not done well on NOCTI. I don't know that as an instructor you need to use this technique for everything that you teach or every textbook you interact with. I do think picking something that's very technical that you do refer to the textbook for within the instruction is a good place to start. So with the one that you really want the students to read the material, have a better understanding is probably the good jumping in point for this. So I hand out the cards. I explain to the students that we're going to be using this technique. This is when I notify all of my students who have all the different colored pens, the numerous highlighters, the glitter pens, that this is their opportunity to shine, to break all that out. And they have these giant pencil cases that they pull out and have all of that to take their colorful notes and encourage all of that and as much creativity as they want for their notes. I do appreciate that because I'm also have an addiction to office supplies and have, similar pen sets in my desk. I'm sure that would play out differently in my construction shops where I feel like maybe they're just always riding around with the nub of a pencil that they have tucked behind their ear, but whatever method is effective to get students to take notes. So I do want to mention that I understand with COVID and hybrid and virtual learning, so many presentations, and I'm looking forward to participating in some of them as well, are about technology, and I'm here talking about a pen and paper technique. But the nice thing about this is once my students are proficient at using the technique, that even as hybrid or virtual, I can ask them to take a set of notes before I'm trying to present the information to them via the computer where there can be so many more obstacles. And again, they just have at least some kind of background knowledge of the information. So I don't think this is a lost technique in the virtual world. So the first thing I kind of, I give the students their Cornwall notes and I let them know that today we're going to be learning about body cavities and we're going to also be learning about this SQ3R technique. So I asked them to look in the chapter, and you're looking at the first page that we'll be studying and taking notes on. And on the top of their notes, write body cavities and the dates, and then move through the process. So they understand that we're going to be surveying the text, we're going to be forming questions, we're going to be writing down answers to those questions, and then reviewing the text for more detailed information. So if for my audience, I am looking for this to be interactive. So if you can type in the question and answer box, the kind of the questions that I'm proposing to you, just let me know you're out there and engaged and understanding what it is that I'm talking about. So first thing I would ask my students to do is take a look at, we're talking about the body cavities section here. So this point down. Take a look at this and just tell me, and if you guys just want to type in the Q&A box, what are the headings that you see on this page about this topic? So again, just getting them to interact with the text and let me know, letting them understand what the headings are so that we can, further talk about and break down and teach them how to interact with the text. All right, so somebody said body cavities. Yes, body cavities is the main topic. And then we have the dorsal cavities, the ventral cavities, correct, awesome. And then even the subcategories here of thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. And I let students know we're not talking about the abdominal pelvic quadrants in this lesson because we address that differently. Thanks guys for the feedback. So I then point out to them, and I'm going to scroll through here, take a look at the pictures. So, and the tables. So I point out on the next page of their textbook, there's this table down here, and it talks about the body cavities and the organs. Ooh, let me go back there. And we will take a look at that as well. And then on the third page, there is this figure here that shows the organs in the body cavities. So this picture shows them, this table talks about what is where. So again, just pointing out and helping them learn how to interact with this text. Okay. The next thing that I ask my students, and I'm going to back this up for you guys, is to find all the bold words. Those would be all the vocabulary terms, and just tell me these terms. I also let them know if they don't know how to pronounce a term, it is absolutely okay that I will help them, because some of these, like mediastinum down here, can be difficult to pronounce. So if some of you guys could just type in some of the bold words that you see there in just this page here of text on body cavities. All right, so what will be looking for from the students are dorsal body cavities, ventral body cavities, cranial cavity, spinal cavity, mediastinum, pleural, abdominal, pelvic, and diaphragm. So from there, I have let them know to write that down in the vocabulary section of their notes. So over in that left-hand column that they had. And at this point, I just have them write the terms. I don't have them define them. And the reason I do this is to chunk the vocabulary in this chapter. This chapter alone has 111 vocabulary terms. And so to help the students understand what terms go with what topic, chunking them like this helps them break down where they belong and help them define those words. And we come back to this at the end so that the students can quiz themselves and see after we've went through this text if they understand the definitions here. So then the next thing I have students do is turn each of these headings into a question. So we would be looking here at body cavities. That would become what are body cavities, dorsal cavities, what are dorsal cavities, ventral cavities, what are ventral cavities, what are thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. So they write all of those down. And we know that this is, our mission today is to answer these 4 questions. So then we read the text with the purpose of answering the question. So how I do this, and you can choose to do it differently. You may want to go in for detail right away. I just have them read, actually I out loud read the text, and then have them answer the question just in general. And then at the end, we go back and fill in the detail. So what I do, just again, start to model this, is just read with the idea of answering what are body cavities, read that section out loud. And so I would read out loud. Contrary to external appearance, the body is not a solid structure. It is made up of open spaces or cavities that contain compact, well-ordered arrangement of internal organs. The two major body cavities are called dorsal cavities and ventral body cavities, and the location and outlines of them can be seen in this figure here. We refer to this figure a lot. So after I read that out loud, I remind students of the second R, which is recite and answer the question without looking back at the text and in their own words, what how they would answer the question, what are body cavities? And I kind of help guide them to the answer that they're open spaces that contain organs. That's all I want to know about this question at this point. And then we move through each of the questions that way. I do also, it's not just note taking, it is the lesson. So I give examples to help sure they make sure they understand the cavity. So here I have a skull. And if I remove the skull cap, here would be the organ, which is the brain. And if I remove the brain, this empty space that's left here is the cavity. That is what we're talking about with body cavities. This is an example of one, and we're going to learn that this is the cranial cavity. Then the next question is, what are dorsal cavities? That was the second heading. And so before we even look at the text, the lesson before this was anatomical directions, and we learned the term dorsal. And I remind students of that term and some of the anecdotes for remembering it. So when I think dorsal fin. This is my very pathetic drawing of a fish, maybe a shark or a dolphin with a dorsal fin. And again, just a way to make connections between the material with the students. And that's why I have this drawing and pictures over here. And the students can draw this to remind themselves of that information as well. So we go back to the text and, oh, actually even before the text, they learned the day before that dorsal means towards the back. So I can have them make that note if they need the reminder. And I refer them because the text on this is pretty complicated. I'll read it for you here quickly. Dorsal cavities shown in figure 1.5 include the space inside the skull that contains the brain. It is called the cranial cavity. The space inside the spinal column is called the spinal cavity. It contains the spinal cord. The cranial and spinal cavities are dorsal cavities because they are located in the dorsal position of the body. So I direct them to the picture. Take a look at the picture. Look at the key here. We're talking about dorsal body cavities. Here's the dorsal body cavities. Dorsal towards the back, so that helps them make sense of it. And then guide them to the answer that the dorsal cavities are spaces that contain the brain and spinal cord, and they're dorsal because they're towards the back. We move on through the ventral cavities, and again, kind of walk them through the process again. We know that ventral means belly side. Again, activate that prior knowledge from what we learned the day before. Refer them again to the picture, read out loud what it says about ventral cavities, which what it says is the ventral cavities are located in the ventral portion of the body. That's what the text says. So again, that could be very difficult for the student, to understand just that sentence. So again, take advantage of the tools the text offers you. Take a look here at this figure. And again, it helps you understand these are the ventral cavities. They're the ones in purple. They're on the belly side of the organism, in this case of the human. So again, guide them to spaces that contain organs toward the belly side of the body. And continue through thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. So they know I have some experience with the term thoraco or thoracic, which means chest. So again, a lot of my students watch medical shows. Grey's Anatomy is a big one. I promise them I'm going to binge watch it this Christmas break. So they know, like, oh yes, they did a thoracentesis or a thoracotomy. So they kind of know, even if they don't recall it from our medical terminology, that means chest. So again, making the connections between the text and what they know. Abdomen refers to abdomen, stomach, or belly, and obviously pelvic to the pelvis pelvic bone. And I use a model that I have in my classroom. I show on my own self where these areas are to help them understand the information. So after reading about thoracic cavity, the text says the upper ventral cavities include the thoracic cavity, a space that you may think of as your chest cavity. The mid portion is a subdivision of the thoracic cavity called the mediastinum, and the lateral subdivisions are called the right and left pleural cavity. So again, I walk them through what all that means. So we leave with cavity space in the chest area, and same thing here with abdominal and pelvic areas. So at this point, we have just basically answered what are body cavities, dorsal cavities, ventral cavities, thoracic and abdominal pelvic cavities. Now for review, we go back in and we find all the detail and add those to our notes. Let's take a look at my time here. So we go back, these are the notes that we have, and we read the rest of the text, and we find out here that the body cavities, there are two major body cavities of the dorsal and ventral body cavities. Again, my very rudimentary artistic skills, but students appreciate it, takes the pressure off of them. They do know that at the beginning of this lesson, I will collect their notes, and I'm not checking for any kind of artistic skill or anything specific other than that they have the general idea of what it is that we're doing to take notes. So they can, use as many different colors or not. They can cut out pictures later and add them here if they prefer. What they're their notes, so whatever they prefer to do. But again, I'm not looking for artistic skills, obviously. And then we go through again, dorsal, we find the information here, contains the brain and spinal cord and dorsal because it's towards the back we knew. And then we find out cranial and spinal cavity are in the dorsal cavity, brain is in the cranial cavity, spine is in the spinal cavity. And ultimately, this is what students need to know, what the dorsal cavity is, what organs are in each cavity. So again, have them, drawing pictures as, they best see fit for their information. Refer back to these figures to help them understand the information and go through each of the cavities like that. So again, adding pictures as it is helpful to the students. And I'm going to, just kind of walk you through this. So again, adding all the information and ultimately getting down to the fact of what organs are in each cavity, where those cavities are, what the subdivisions of those cavities are for each of these. And then we take a look here because the text doesn't explain all of that information. It does rely on the other parts of the text, like this table. So when we did dorsal body cavities, this information was in the text, that the brain is in the cranial cavity and the spinal cord is in the spinal cavity. But it never told us what was in the abdominal cavity or the pelvic cavity. We made some connections between the lungs and pleural, and we need this information here. So I think without teaching students how to interact with the text, they would never really pay this close attention to the tables and some of the figures. I referred back to that figure with the dorsal and ventral body cavities several times throughout this lesson to help them understand the information. And I think when students are trying to, fill out worksheets and, the typical assignments we give them, they don't really know to pay attention. And sometimes a lot of the important information are in these tables and graphics for the lesson, for the unit. So at the end, they have a set of notes, with the pictures. And again, they end up with the information here. We even make further connections as, we talk about the brain being in the cranial cavity. I remind them that cranio is the combining form for cranial cavity. So they, again, can help remember that information. And we kind of go back and forth here. And then lastly, I have them take a look at this figure as well, because this is going to show them and helps them visualize. And again, throughout this lesson, I use a body model that these organs, come in and out and identify, where they are and what cavities they're in to help them engage with that information. But that doesn't have all of them. And so this is helpful for them to take a look at and kind of, again, make connections between what we're talking about, what the text says for those that are visual learners. And then here they have, again, a set of complete information, and I talk them through this process. Again, some more of my artwork. And then at the end, and I think this is an important part, like I said, my students, we have some study techniques, but, they have a hard time kind of differentiating out, what do I know? What do I need to focus on? So at the very end, I have students, after we wrap up this lesson, go back and take a look at that original set of vocab terms that they wrote down and ask themselves, do I know what a dorsal body cavity is? Do I know what a ventral body cavity is? Do I know what the cranial cavity is, spinal cavity, and each of those terms? And if they don't at this point in the lesson, I have them let me know, and we further continue the discussion so that each of them understands what each vocab term means for this section. And then I also send them back to that original set of questions. And in that summary part of the Cornell notes, before they hand them in for the day, I have them summarize or write down the answer to that question for each of those, and see if they have an understanding of the information. That essentially is the lesson for my students. I'm going to show you an example. I have this in your handouts as well. So this is, kind of what I'm expecting the notes to look like. I do direct students to just use a new sheet of paper, or direct them to leave half a sheet as we move through these topics. And so they're okay with, it's okay to use more than one sheet of paper, things like that. So this is what I'm expecting a, set of notes to look like. And before I did this lesson, and one of the other items that was in your handout, which I could pull up here, is that I did walk myself through this lesson, and I kind of have a script of my own development that walks me through what I would say. And do I follow this to a T every time? Absolutely not. So the hardest part of me being virtual for this presentation is that, and all of us know this as instructors, right? I feed off of my audience, I feed off of my students. I could tell by the look on their face if they're engaged, if they understand, if they don't, whatever's going on. But this leaves me here to make these notes, and this script allows me to make those med-term connections, reminds me, to show them the silly things about the dorsal fin, and all those kind of things that without it here, I maybe, neglect to do that. I don't do this for every time I use this technique, but when I first rolled this technique out, I needed to do this for myself to have a good understanding of what it was going to look like for my students. And it took time, but I think we all know that sometimes, better lessons and the better use of these techniques is that, we spend the time and kind of imagine what that's going to be like. I'm a very kind of visual learner, and even visualizing in my head what the lesson looks like helps me as well. So that's kind of a lot of talking, which I know I can do about the lesson. So like I mentioned, from this point on, the next, anatomy unit, I kind of have students do a guided practice where I have them pick, I identify a section and I have them take notes using this technique while I'm walking around the room. I've had them do them in groups and kind of work together to play off of each other, those connections between terms they may or may not know. And I think, can be adapted in a lot of ways, for your classrooms. So at that point, I'm open to any questions.
Now, right now, we don't have any questions in the question box or in the chat.
Okay. Just curious from participants, how many of you, since my poll everywhere didn't seem to work out, how many of you do use a textbook in your program? Like that you have a textbook in your program?
I see one yes.
Okay. Okay. Do not use a
One
dedicated textbook.
no.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I know not every program, has a textbook. I know some instructors have definitely gotten away from using textbooks. Like I said, I know many of my students are headed on to post-secondary where there will, have an expectation of a textbook, and I thought this would be helpful to them. For those of you that do use them, do you refer to them a lot or have your students interact with them a lot? You'll use a lot of online materials, right? Okay. Yes, the nice thing about the textbook, I did switch, although I like this, I still use this actual text for this chapter because I think it's laid out better in the textbook I used to use. And the new textbook is that I do have online access. And like I said, it does have the text to talk features, and it does have some other online tools that also help the students kind of interact with the material. Okay. So yeah, thanks for hanging in there with me. My original intent for this presentation was that this was in person and that we would kind of be interacting directly, and you would have, been taking notes and, kind of my classroom setting and kind of that interaction. So, tried to adapt it to this format. I don't know if it came over as well, but thanks for hanging in there with me.
So are there any other questions that or comments that you have that could be helpful or for the whole group from any of the participants? I mean, Samuel says he thinks that these strategies are going to help.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And some other folks, Darcy says they're looking forward to using this strategy.
Great. Great. I'm glad to hear that. I put all the materials I have in the handouts as well. So, hopefully that helps you as well. And if you need anything, or you can definitely reach out to me. I believe my contact information is available
Okay.
on the participant list. Yeah.